Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis. I am the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we get to continue the Nexus CMS User Learning Series, focusing on how you can display content within the CMS in meaningful ways to you. As always, of course, these webinars are recorded and they will be making their way up to our YouTube channel. And if you happen to be viewing this on the YouTube channel, well, hopefully this video earns you a like and maybe a subscribe. It helps the channel, helps CTC, helps everything out. You know how the things work. For those of you who have joined us live, however, we also keep our eyes on the questions window. So if you do have questions about today's topic or anything in this user learning series, feel free to throw it in the questions window and we'll be answering those either in line if it fits or at the end in a QA session. So without further ado, let's jump in. So what are we talking about today? I mean, you found a piece of content. Are you trying to figure out if that's the right piece of content or not? In the CMS, in the Nexus suite, this tool set offers really a powerful way for you to preview your content, I think, very effectively. And so today we're going to talk about how you can get more detailed previews, how you can get access to a little bit more information, how you can resize and kind of control what you're seeing so it works well for you while you're using this tool set. So we're just focusing here how you can streamline your content workflow using the Nexus CMS and all of its preview features. We're going to go through a couple of very specific things here. We're going to talk about the display control bar, show you where it is. We're going to update our preview image sizing, controlling what that looks like. We're going to kind of choose a couple of different layout displays. Some might work better for you than others. That's why it's an option. And we're going to take a little bit of a look at the details. We're also going to take a look at loading some additional content in so you can see how this loading works. And we talked about loading in the previous webinar as well. But in this displaying of options, we're going to take a look at one option within the display area as well. Some of the extra details that you might want to load. So first things first, let's take a look at the display control bar, the kind of primary focus here today within the CMS. So I'm going to pull the CMS forward here. I'm going to squish it down a little bit so we can kind of see that display control bar option here. And I'm going to run a saved search. I'm just going to look for maybe some details here from the MEP productivity pack that we offer. So I've got this showing up inside of here. We can kind of see some previews. We can kind of see some stuff, but there's different ways of viewing it. And then to control that, we need to be in the display control bar. I'm actually going to make this a little bit wider here just so we don't see this little design app piece squished here in the recording. So in here, at the top right, there's the ability to turn off or on the filters panel. This is a display option. There is a slider here to control image sizing, and there's 3 buttons there to actually control what's going on as far as how the tiles themselves are appearing. So first things first, let's take a look at the preview image sizing aspect of that control bar right there. So in the preview image sizing, if you just hit the slider, kind of slide it to the left, it squishes it down, slide it to the right, it makes it a little bit bigger here in this display. And that can be good. But also, as you mouse over this, there is an option to have somewhat of an enlarged preview. And that's also sort of controlled by that little slider right there. So as I mouse over something out here, I can kind of see a slightly bigger preview that lets me actually read, in a lot of cases, what's going on inside the preview itself, especially if it's a drafting view. That's kind of meaningful. Some of the other things like door content or wall content or sub-assemblies or assemblies or things like that, those previews are kind of obvious just from the small tile, but sometimes when there's text involved, it's just a little bit difficult to see. So turning on that enlarged preview might be meaningful. That actually takes us a little bit on a tangent away from this little control bar here and up to your username. In my case, my username, Sean Zerbis, is up here. And if you go into your user settings up here at the very top, you can toggle off or on the enlarged preview on mouse over. Now, some people like to have this turned off so you don't get that pop-up as you mouse over things. And that's okay, but if you are working with details, you might want to toggle that back on. So again, you go into user settings, you can turn on the enlarged preview, and you can control how much bigger than the current tile size it gets. It's as small as 1.5 times larger or 3 times larger than the current tile size. So it's based on a percentage, and it's also based on the current size of your tiles out there right now. So 300%, in my case, I make it as big as it possibly can get. And as I mouse over one of these now, because I have that turned on, I see 3x the size of what it is right now out here on the actual preview image. So depending on how big you've got this, you might want to make it bigger. You can see it even bigger out there, or if you make it really small, it's 3x this size, but that's still pretty small. So that one there, I like to have my previews just a little bit larger than that. Okay, so we talked about the slider, we talked about the hover preview graphic. There's also different ways of displaying those tiles of information, and sometimes that can give you a little bit of extra information. So right now, I'm showing this in sort of a tile mode where it just shows the name of the piece of content within the CMS. And I can mouse over, of course, and see some extra details, and that's all well and good. But sometimes I might want to see this a little differently. For example, I might want to see this in a list view. This gives me a little bit more information. It lets me see still that preview there, and I can still get that hover graphic out there. But I can also see things like what the name is. I can see the rating of it if it has a rating. I can see what libraries perhaps it's associated to, the tags that are associated to it, how many reviews it's been given, if somebody's actually reviewed the content or not, if it's been loaded or downloaded. And I can also see, in the case of Revit content, how many Revit versions are associated with that piece of content and what the category is. So there's a good little summary of the information here. And sometimes this is preferable when you're looking through a collection of content. You know, in my case, I filtered for views directly. I use a pre-saved search. We have a webinar that's been done in this playlist about that, but and you can always come back for future webinars where we might review that. But we have, say, a pre-saved search that's filtering down to views into a particular library. So the libraries and the views maybe aren't, or the category maybe aren't quite as critical, but still, I kind of like to see this information sometime just for a visual confirmation. Sometimes I don't do a filtered preview here a filtered Revit category, and now I like to know, okay, that's a schedule, and if I scroll down far enough, you know, that's a duct accessory, right? Like I can see what some of these categories are. That's mechanical equipment, and it just kind of helps, you know, relieve a little bit of that, so that display of information sometimes can be really helpful. Another display that some people like to look at here is this grid-based view, this table view. Now, I see this used more by the managers of the CMS, but this sometimes can be meaningful as well, where I can see the name. It's kind of in a column-based system here. I can see the libraries and the tags that are associated. If I scroll to the right there, I can see where it's hosted. There's other information that shows up inside of here, whether it's got attachments or ratings or whatever. I can see more information. But to me, as far as like a daily Revit user, I don't find this quite as meaningful. I personally prefer seeing it summarized all on one screen, so I'm not scrolling all over the place. Or actually, what I personally prefer the most is the tile view. This is how I usually look at it. And while I'm in tile view, sometimes I might want to dig into something a bit more deeply. I might want to see a bit more about its details or its data that's related to it. And so for that, we're going to take a look at accessing some of the details for the content. How do I get a bit more information here? So if I'm showing just tiles and I'm like, well, hey, what is this? Is this a drafting view? Is this a sheet? Is this a piece of equipment? Like, what is this data inside of here? You can always right click and go into the detail panel, and it will fly out a detail panel for that particular piece of content here. So now I'm seeing the MP steam condensate pump. It's actually its own floaty little window, and I could pop it to a different monitor if I wanted to and have some data about this. Inside of Revit content in particular, there's often family types. And so in this case, the view and the type is the same, but there's a bunch of data that shows up inside of here. I have mine set to only show me data when parameters have values, because there's other data inside of here that has been captured, but it has no value. In some cases, I like to just show parameters with values, so it hides those without. But I can see what the data values are on this particular piece of content. And this is way, way more detailed than just that list view was up here, right? It's giving me everything about the data inside. It's also giving me the libraries and the tags, whether it's cloud hosted or not, who processed it, when it was last updated, and the Revit versions and the Revit units, or the AutoCAD versions and AutoCAD categories and things like that. Depends on what the actual properties are here and what piece of content I'm searching for. Today, I just happen to be focusing more on the Revit side. But the goal here is that I can see some of this extra information and I can leverage this data so I can make an informed decision before I load this content into my project, okay? So that's kind of the whole purpose of this details window. I'm going to show one more thing about this details window and tangent into loading just a little bit, okay? I'm going to close out of this details window and I'm going to run a search for something like, let's see, I'm going to run an architectural search here, my CTC doors. So I'm seeing a bunch of data here and I see down here at the bottom, swing single. I'm going to right click this, I'm going to check its detail. And by the way, just a note about this, we have a whole webinar also just about this details window if you want to know more about leveraging this. But here I do have a series of different family types that exist. Okay, so if I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh yeah, this HM00F3684, this is the one that I want. For whatever reason, I've just made my mind up that this is what I want. Well, when you load this, I do have a Revit session running right now. When I load this, I can either hit the load button or double click. We talked about that in the last session. But I'm going to go ahead and load this into Revit. And it's going to ask me here, it's going to pop up a type selector. And it's going to say, okay, so which type do you want? Well, I've chosen this guy here. I want that one. So I'm going to choose that here and load that into my project directly. This happens to be a 2020 version, so it's going to have to do a little upgrade here. And eventually it will activate here my Revit instance. Let me close my details panel and it'll initiate the insertion command. So I can drop this door in, do whatever I want to do with it. It's whatever. Okay, so I've done that. Great. But now I choose like, hey, I'm back in the CMS and I was looking through those details, reopen that detail panel, and I decided like I want this full glass door as well, the FG type. Okay, so let's load that again. Load that again. Let's go back into Revit. Oh, it's not actually popping that window anymore, right? But Sean, I saw that detail. I know there's an extra type. How do I get access to it? Well, if you remember back in the loading webinar that we did, you can right click on something and you can force it to reload. If you remember, we talked about loading, just loading the one that we have. Well, reload will force it to re-pop up this type selector, and then you can go through the details, the display of the information. That's why we're talking about this again today. You can go through this display of information for the different types that are available and load this new selected type. Or you can choose multiples if you really want more than one. I'm going to choose just the one here and load that back into my project, and it'll load that type in, or it will reload in to my active project the type that was already there if I chose that same type and reset it back to the original, okay? So now I have, in this case, two types. I have, oh, I don't have my properties window open. I should probably open that. I have swing single FG, and I have, the F type. So they're both in here, and it's the same family, but they were both loaded based on what I had loaded, based on the details that I was displaying inside of here. Okay. That's all about the display of content within the CMS, right? We have the slider for the actual preview image sizing. We have the different types of displays over here, my personal preference being the tiles. We talked about the right click and the detail panel out here. So you can actually see the details of a piece of content and the parameters and the values and all the information about them that we can see. And we also talked a little bit about user settings here up at the top, where you can turn off or on the enlarged preview on mouse hover and change how much bigger than the actual preview that hover preview happens to be. So we've looked at all of those different options. All right, now we're going to jump into Q&A here in just a little bit, but for those of you who are kind of watching this on the YouTube side, we always want to say thank you. We always appreciate views on the videos. We hope that's meaningful for you. and that you got something out of this today on how to change the display of your content. We always hope to see you in future CTC webinars as well. We hope you have a fantastic day.